Sarah Martinez, a 28-year-old single mother, struggles to support her 6-year-old daughter Emma after losing her job during the pandemic. Desperate for work, she applies for an administrative assistant position at a tech company in Austin, Texas. During the interview, the staff ridicule her for bringing Emma along, since she had no one else to watch her. At the most humiliating moment, the company's Millionaire CEO Marcus Thompson witnesses the scene and becomes intrigued by Emma's exceptional intelligence and by Sarah's dignity in the face of adversity. What begins as an embarrassing situation transforms into a journey of discoveries, unexpected opportunities, and proof that sometimes our greatest challenges can lead to the most extraordinary new beginnings. The rain hammered against the windshield of Sarah's 15-year-old Honda Civic as she pulled into the parking lot of Tech Vision Solutions. Her hands trembled slightly on the steering wheel, not from the cold October morning in Austin, but from the crushing weight of what this interview meant. 3 months without steady income, 2 weeks until rent was due, and Emma, her 6-year-old daughter, sitting in the back seat with her worn-out coloring book, completely unaware that their entire future might be decided in the next hour. Sarah caught her reflection in the rearview mirror and winced. The black blazer she'd bought at Goodwill last week looked professional enough, but the dark circles under her eyes betrayed too many sleepless nights spent calculating bills and searching job boards until 3 a.m. She'd applied to 47 positions in the past month. This was interview number 12, and the first one that had felt even remotely promising when they called. "Mommy, is this where you're going to work?" Emma's voice cut through Sarah's spiraling thoughts. Sarah turned to face her daughter, forcing her most convincing smile. "Maybe, baby, Mommy's going to try her best." Emma nodded solemnly, her dark eyes so much like Sarah's, reflecting a maturity that no 6-year-old should possess. "I'll be super quiet and good, I promise." The plan had been simple. Drop Emma at her neighbor Mrs. Chen's apartment, attend the interview, pick Emma up afterward. But Mrs. Chen had called at 6 a.m. with a stomach bug, and Sarah's backup babysitter, her 19-year-old cousin Miguel, was stuck in Dallas helping his girlfriend move. Every other option had fallen through like dominoes, leaving Sarah with an impossible choice: miss the interview or bring Emma along. She'd chosen to fight. "Remember what we practiced?" Sarah asked, gathering her purse and the manila folder containing copies of her resume. "Sit quietly in the waiting area. Color nicely. Don't interrupt unless it's an emergency," Emma recited, then added with a grin, "and smile pretty if anyone talks to me." They hurried through the rain toward the gleaming glass building that housed Tech Vision Solutions. The lobby was all polished marble and modern art, the kind of place that screamed success and made Sarah feel like an imposter in her thrift store blazer. The receptionist, a woman in her 20s with perfectly straightened blonde hair and a smile that didn't reach her eyes, looked up as they approached. "Sarah Martinez for a 10 a.m. interview with Ms. Patricia Wells," Sarah said, trying to project confidence she didn't feel. The receptionist's gaze shifted to Emma, and her expression tightened almost imperceptibly. "I wasn't aware you'd be bringing company." Heat flooded Sarah's cheeks. "My childcare fell through this morning. She'll be quiet, I promise. She has activities to keep her busy." "I see." The receptionist's tone suggested she didn't see at all, or rather saw exactly what she wanted to see: an unprofessional single mother who couldn't manage her personal life. "Well, you can wait over there. Someone will be with you shortly." Sarah guided Emma to a seating area in the corner, as far from the main reception desk as possible. She'd brought Emma's favorite coloring book, the one about princesses and dragons, along with a fresh pack of crayons and her tablet with headphones just in case. Emma settled in immediately, spreading her materials across the coffee table with the focused concentration she brought to everything. Watching her daughter, Sarah felt that familiar ache in her chest. Emma deserved so much more than this precarious existence they'd been living since David left. She deserved stability, security, a mother who didn't have to choose between a job interview and proper childcare. The guilt was a constant companion these days, whispering that she was failing at the most important job she'd ever had. "Sarah Martinez." A woman's voice cut through her self-recrimination. Sarah looked up to see a tall, imposing figure approaching. Patricia Wells. Based on the LinkedIn photo she'd studied obsessively, the woman was probably in her 40s, with steel grey hair pulled into a severe bun and the kind of power suit that probably cost more than Sarah's monthly rent. Her eyes immediately found Emma, and her expression shifted from professional neutrality to barely concealed irritation. "Ms. Martinez, I see you've brought additional attendees to our meeting." "I apologize for the short notice," Sarah began, rising from her chair. "My childcare situation fell through unexpectedly this morning and—" "I see." Patricia's interruption was crisp and dismissive. She glanced at her watch, a sleek silver piece that probably cost more than Sarah's car. "Well, I suppose we should proceed. Conference room B is this way." As they walked through the open office space, Sarah became acutely aware of the stares following them. Employees looked up from their desks, some with curiosity, others with barely disguised amusement. A group of younger workers near the break room didn't bother hiding their whispered comments. Did she seriously bring her kid to a job interview? That's one way to guarantee you won't get hired. Some people have no sense of professionalism. Each comment landed like a physical blow, but Sarah kept her chin up and her steps steady. She'd endured worse. The night David packed his bags and told her he wasn't ready for this kind of responsibility, the moment she'd been laid off from her previous job with 2 hours' notice. The conversation with Emma 3 weeks ago, when her daughter asked why they were eating peanut butter sandwiches for dinner again. Conference room B was a sterile glass box with a long table and uncomfortable-looking chairs. Patricia gestured for Sarah to sit, then positioned herself across the table like a general preparing for battle. Through the glass walls, Sarah could see other employees gathering, their faces pressed against the windows like they were watching a particularly entertaining reality show. "So, Ms. Martinez," Patricia began, shuffling through what Sarah assumed was her application. "Tell me about your experience in administrative support." Sarah launched into the pitch she'd practiced in her bathroom mirror for hours, highlighting her 5 years as an office manager at a small marketing firm, her proficiency with various software programs, her ability to handle multiple tasks efficiently. She tried to ignore the growing audience outside the conference room and the way Patricia's attention kept drifting to the window, where Emma was still sitting quietly with her coloring book. "Your resume shows a gap in employment," Patricia noted, her tone suggesting this was a personal failing rather than an economic reality that had affected millions of Americans. "I was laid off from my previous position in July due to company downsizing," Sarah explained. "I've been actively searching for new opportunities while ensuring I could maintain my responsibilities as a parent." "Responsibilities as a parent." Patricia repeated the phrase like it was in a foreign language. "And how exactly do you plan to balance those responsibilities with the demands of a full-time position? This role requires flexibility, sometimes working late hours or weekends." Sarah had anticipated this question, had prepared for it, but sitting in this glass box with dozens of eyes watching her struggle felt like being trapped in a fishbowl. "I'm fully committed to meeting the demands of the position. I have reliable childcare arrangements and—" "Clearly not that reliable," Patricia interrupted, gesturing toward the lobby where Emma was visible through the glass walls. The laughter started small, a few chuckles from the employees gathered outside the conference room, but it grew, rippling through the office like a wave. Sarah felt her face burn with humiliation as she realized what they were laughing at: her desperation, her circumstances, the absurdity of a single mother thinking she deserved a chance in their polished, professional world. Through the glass, she could see Emma look up from her coloring book, confusion creasing her small face as she registered the laughter and stares. The sight of her daughter's bewilderment was worse than any personal humiliation Sarah had endured. "Perhaps," Patricia said, her voice cutting through the ambient cruelty, "we should reschedule this interview for a time when you can give it your full attention." The dismissal was clear and Sarah felt something inside her crack. Not break, but crack like ice under pressure. She'd been through too much, fought too hard to crumble now, but watching her daughter sit alone in that lobby while a room full of strangers laughed at their situation was almost more than she could bear. "I understand your concerns," Sarah said, her voice steadier than she felt. "But I want you to know that my personal circumstances have never interfered with my professional performance. In fact, they've made me more efficient, more determined, and more reliable than I've ever been. When you have someone depending on you the way Emma depends on me, failure isn't an option." Patricia's expression remained unchanged, but something in her posture suggested she was already mentally moving on to the next candidate. The laughter from outside the conference room had died down, but Sarah could feel the weight of judgment pressing against the glass walls. "We'll be in touch," Patricia said, gathering her papers with the efficiency of someone accustomed to ending uncomfortable conversations. Sarah nodded, maintaining her dignity even as her world seemed to collapse around her. She stood, shook Patricia's hand with a firmness that surprised them both, and walked out of the conference room with her head high. But as she crossed the office toward Emma, the whispers followed her like shadows. That was painful to watch. What was she thinking? Some people just don't get it. Emma looked up as Sarah approached, her coloring book forgotten. How did it go, Mommy? Sarah knelt beside her daughter's chair, gathering the crayons and coloring book with hands that only trembled slightly. We'll see, baby. Sometimes these things take time. It was then that she noticed him, a man in an expensive suit standing near the elevator, watching them with an expression she couldn't quite read. He was older, maybe in his 50s, with graying hair and the kind of presence that suggested authority. But it was his eyes that caught her attention. They weren't filled with pity or amusement like the others. There was something else there, something that looked almost like recognition. As Sarah helped Emma gather her things, she had no way of knowing that the man by the elevator was Marcus Thompson, CEO of Tech Vision Solutions, or that he'd witnessed every moment of her humiliation. She didn't know that he'd built his company from nothing after growing up in foster care, or that her quiet dignity in the face of cruelty had reminded him of his own mother's strength during their darkest days. All Sarah knew was that another door had closed, another opportunity had slipped away, and she was back where she started. A single mother with a 6-year-old daughter, 2 weeks until rent was due, and no idea how she was going to make it work. But sometimes the most important moments in our lives happen when we're not looking, when we're focused on simply putting one foot in front of the other and maintaining our dignity in the face of adversity. Sometimes the people who matter most are the ones watching from the shadows, seeing not our failures but our strength. The elevator doors had barely closed behind them when Emma tugged on Sarah's blazer. Her small voice, usually so bright and curious, carried a weight that made Sarah's heart clench. "Mommy, why were those people laughing?" Sarah pressed the button for the ground floor, buying herself a few seconds to formulate an answer that wouldn't crush her daughter's spirit. The elevator's mirrored walls reflected their image back at her, a tired woman in a second-hand suit, holding the hand of a little girl who deserved so much better than this moment. Sometimes adults laugh when they're uncomfortable, baby. It wasn't really about us. Emma considered this with the serious expression she wore when working through difficult concepts, but it felt mean. "I know." Sarah squeezed her daughter's hand. "But we can't control how other people act. We can only control how we respond." The lobby felt different as they walked through it, colder somehow, as if the laughter from upstairs had seeped through the floors and infected the marble and glass. The blonde receptionist didn't look up as they passed, suddenly very interested in her computer screen. Sarah was grateful for the oversight. She wasn't sure she could maintain her composure through another judgmental stare. The rain had intensified during the interview, turning the Austin morning into a gray, soggy mess that matched Sarah's mood perfectly. She fumbled with her keys, hands shaking slightly as the weight of failure settled over her shoulders like a heavy coat. "Can we get pancakes?" Emma asked as Sarah started the car. "The ones with the smiley faces." Sarah's throat tightened. Emma's favorite breakfast spot, a small diner called Sunny Side Up about 10 minutes from their apartment, served pancakes with whipped cream arranged into cheerful faces. They'd made it a tradition to celebrate good news there, but they hadn't been in 3 months. Not since the money got too tight for such luxuries. "Maybe next week, sweetheart," Sarah managed, hating herself for the disappointment that flickered across Emma's face. "When you get the new job?" "When I get the new job," Sarah agreed, though the words felt like ash in her mouth. The drive home took them through the heart of Austin, past the gleaming tech companies and trendy restaurants that had transformed the city over the past decade. Sarah had moved here 8 years ago, fresh out of college and full of dreams about making it in the booming Texas economy. She'd met David at a coffee shop near the University of Texas campus, where he was finishing his MBA, and she was working as a barista while job hunting. Those early days felt like someone else's life now. Late nights at live music venues on 6th Street, weekend trips to the hill country, the giddy excitement of planning a future together. David had proposed on New Year's Eve 2016, right as the fireworks exploded over Lady Bird Lake. Emma had arrived 2 years later, and for a brief shining moment everything had seemed perfect. But perfection, Sarah had learned, was fragile. David's job in consulting required constant travel, and he'd grown increasingly distant after Emma's birth. The demands of new parenthood had overwhelmed him in ways that Sarah, juggling her own career while doing most of the childcare, found difficult to understand or forgive. Their fights became more frequent, more bitter, until one Tuesday morning he'd announced he was taking a position with his company's Dubai office. "I need space to figure out who I am," he'd said, as if his identity as a father and partner were constraints to be shed, rather than roles to be embraced. Sarah shook off the memories as she pulled into the parking lot of their apartment complex. Riverside Gardens wasn't exactly gardens, and the Colorado River was more of a distant promise than an actual view from their second-floor unit, but it was affordable, or had been before her layoff, and Emma had friends in the complex. Their neighbor, Mrs. Chen, was waiting on her balcony as they climbed the stairs. The elderly woman's face was pale, and she clutched a tissue in her arthritic hands. "Sarah, honey, I'm so sorry about this morning," she called out. "How did the interview go?" Mrs. Chen had been a godsend since David left, watching Emma when Sarah had appointments, sharing homemade soup when money was tight, offering the kind of grandmotherly presence that Emma craved. Sarah couldn't bring herself to admit the truth about how spectacularly the morning had gone. "We'll see," Sarah said, managing a smile. "These things take time." Mrs. Chen nodded knowingly, but Sarah caught the worried glance she directed toward Emma. The whole complex knew about Sarah's employment situation. Gossip traveled fast in a place where thin walls and financial struggles were shared realities. Inside their apartment, Sarah kicked off the uncomfortable heels she'd borrowed from her cousin and surveyed their domain. One bedroom, which Emma occupied, and a living room where Sarah's pull-out couch served as her bed. The kitchen was barely large enough for one person, but Emma had decorated the refrigerator with drawings of their family, always just the two of them, sometimes with a dog they couldn't afford, occasionally with a daddy figure that grew more abstract with each passing month. "I'm hungry," Emma announced, settling cross-legged on the carpet with her coloring book. Sarah opened the refrigerator and took inventory. Half a gallon of milk, some leftover mac and cheese from 2 nights ago, a few eggs, and the ingredients for peanut butter and jelly sandwiches. The pantry wasn't much better. A bag of rice, some canned soup, and the dregs of a box of cereal that was supposed to last until the end of the week. She made grilled cheese with the last of the bread and opened a can of tomato soup, stretching it with water to make it go further. Emma chattered happily while they ate, telling Sarah about the coloring book she'd been working on in the lobby. "There was a princess who lived in a tower," Emma explained, holding up her artwork. "But she wasn't sad because she had all these friends who visited her. Look, this is the dragon who brings her books, and this is the bird who sings to her." Sarah studied her daughter's drawing, a princess with dark hair like Emma's, surrounded by fantastical creatures in a tower that looked suspiciously like their apartment building. Even in her art, Emma was finding ways to make their circumstances into something magical, something hopeful. "It's beautiful, baby," Sarah said, meaning it completely. After lunch, Emma settled down for quiet time with her tablet, while Sarah opened her laptop at their small dining table. The job search websites glowed accusingly at her. Dozens of applications submitted, dozens of rejections received, dozens more positions that she was either overqualified or underqualified for. She scrolled through new listings, her optimism dimming with each passing minute. Administrative assistant, experience with Salesforce required. Executive assistant, must be available for extensive travel. Office manager, bachelor's degree plus 5 years supervisory experience. The requirements blurred together into an impossible standard that she could never quite meet. Too much experience for entry-level positions, not enough specialized skills for the higher-paying roles, and always the unspoken question that she'd faced this morning. How can we trust you to be reliable when you have a child? Her phone buzzed with a text from her sister Rebecca in Houston. "How did the interview go?" "Fingers crossed." Sarah stared at the message for a long time before responding, "Still waiting to hear back. These things take time." The lie came easily now. She'd been telling variations of it for months, to Rebecca, to her parents, to Mrs. Chen, to anyone who asked how the job search was going. The truth, that she was running out of options, that they were 2 weeks away from eviction, that she was starting to panic about what came next, felt too heavy to share. At 3 p.m., her phone rang. Unknown number with a local Austin area code. Sarah's heart jumped. Maybe Patricia Wells had reconsidered. Maybe there was still a chance. "Hello? Is this Sarah Martinez?" The voice was male, unfamiliar, with a slight accent she couldn't place. "Yes, this is Sarah." "Ms. Martinez, this is James Rodriguez from Tech Vision Solutions. I was wondering if you might be available to come in tomorrow morning for a follow-up interview." Sarah's grip tightened on the phone. "A follow-up interview?" "Yes, with our CEO, Marcus Thompson. He'd like to meet with you personally. Would 9 a.m. work?" Sarah's mind raced. This had to be some kind of mistake. After the disaster of this morning's interview, after the laughter and Patricia Wells's obvious dismissal, Why would the CEO want to meet with her? Yes, 9 a.m. would work, she managed. Excellent. 9 a.m. would work. Same building, but you'll want to go to the executive floor. That's the 15th level. Ask for James Rodriguez when you arrive. After he hung up, Sarah stared at her phone in confusion. Emma looked up from her tablet, picking up on her mother's tension with the radar that children possess. What's wrong, Mommy? Nothing's wrong, baby. Someone wants to talk to Mommy again tomorrow. About the job? Maybe about the job. But even as she said it, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that something didn't add up. CEO interviews weren't standard procedure for administrative assistant positions, especially not after the kind of morning she'd had. That evening, after Emma was asleep, Sarah sat on the couch with her laptop and researched Marcus Thompson. TechVision Solutions website showed a professional headshot of a man in his early 50s with kind eyes and graying temples. The bio was impressive, but not ostentatious. A self-made entrepreneur who'd built the company from a small startup to a mid-sized tech firm specializing in educational software. But it was the personal details that caught her attention. A quote in a recent Austin Business Journal article, "I believe that talent exists everywhere, but opportunity doesn't. Part of our mission is changing that equation." Another interview mentioned his commitment to hiring single parents and providing flexible work arrangements. "Some of our best employees are people who others might overlook because of their circumstances," he'd said. Sarah closed the laptop and stared out the window at the Austin skyline, its lights twinkling in the distance like stars. Tomorrow would bring another chance, another interview, another opportunity to prove herself worthy of consideration. But tonight, for the first time in months, she allowed herself something dangerous: hope. If this part of the story resonates with you, tell me from which place in the world you're following Sarah's journey. Sarah woke up at 5:47 a.m., 13 minutes before her alarm was set to go off. She'd been awake on and off all night, her mind spinning through possible scenarios for the meeting with Marcus Thompson. In her half-conscious state, she'd rehearsed everything from a straightforward job interview to an elaborate confrontation about yesterday's humiliation. Emma was still sleeping, her dark hair fanned across the pillow, one small hand clutching the stuffed elephant that had been her constant companion since she was 2. David had won it for her at the state fair during happier times, back when their biggest worry was whether Emma would be tall enough for the kiddie rides. Sarah moved quietly through their morning routine, grateful that Mrs. Chen had texted the night before confirming she was feeling better and could watch Emma. The elderly woman had seemed almost excited about the prospect, as if Sarah's second chance was somehow her own victory too. "Why do you look nervous, Mommy?" Emma asked over breakfast, studying Sarah's face with the intensity of someone who'd learned to read emotional weather patterns early. "I'm not nervous," Sarah lied, then caught herself. "Actually, I am a little nervous. But sometimes being nervous means something important is about to happen." Emma nodded sagely. "Like when I had to read my story to the whole class and my tummy felt funny, but then everyone clapped?" Exactly like that. The drive to TechVision Solutions felt different this time. The rain had cleared overnight, leaving Austin washed clean under a brilliant October sky. The city looked more hopeful somehow, as if the universe was offering Sarah a fresh canvas on which to paint this second chance. But as she pulled into the same parking lot where her dreams had been crushed less than 24 hours ago, anxiety crept back in. What if this was some kind of elaborate joke? What if Patricia Wells had convinced the CEO that Sarah needed to be personally rejected to truly understand her place? The lobby felt the same, all marble and intimidation, but this time Sarah walked through it with Emma, safely deposited at Mrs. Chen's apartment. The blonde receptionist looked up with the same professional smile that never quite reached her eyes. "Sarah Martinez to see Mr. Thompson," Sarah said, proud that her voice came out steady. "15th floor, elevator bank to your right. James Rodriguez will meet you there." The elevator ride to the executive floor felt like ascending to another world. Where the main office had been open plan and bustling, the 15th floor was quiet, carpeted and decorated with actual art instead of motivational posters. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of Austin's skyline, from the Capitol building to the University of Texas Tower. James Rodriguez was waiting when the elevator doors opened, a man in his 30s with a warm smile and an easy demeanor that immediately put Sarah at ease. "Ms. Martinez, thank you for coming in. I hope you don't mind the change of venue. Mr. Thompson prefers to conduct certain interviews up here." "Certain interviews?" James led her down a hallway lined with photographs of company milestones, employee achievements, and community involvement initiatives. The important ones, he said simply. They paused outside a corner office with glass walls that offered views in two directions. Inside, Sarah could see Marcus Thompson, the same man who'd been standing by the elevator yesterday, watching her humiliation unfold. He was on the phone, gesturing animatedly, but when he saw them approach, he quickly wrapped up his conversation. "Mr. Thompson, this is Sarah Martinez." Marcus Thompson stood as they entered, and Sarah was struck immediately by his presence. He was tall, probably 6'2", with the kind of confident bearing that came from years of making difficult decisions, but his handshake was gentle, and when he smiled, the expression reached his eyes in a way that suggested genuine warmth rather than practiced charm. "Ms. Martinez, please have a seat. Can James get you some coffee? Water?" "Coffee would be great, thank you." The office was a study in understated success. No ostentatious displays of wealth, but quality everywhere, from the handcrafted wooden desk to the leather chairs that probably cost more than Sarah's monthly rent. What caught her attention, though, were the personal touches. Photographs of what appeared to be company employees and their families, a child's drawing taped to one wall, and a small sign that read, "Talent is universal, opportunity is not." "I'll be direct with you, Ms. Martinez," Marcus said once James had brought coffee and closed the door behind him. "I witnessed what happened yesterday during your interview with Patricia Wells." Sarah's stomach dropped. Here it comes, she thought. The lecture about professionalism, about appropriate boundaries, about knowing one's place. "I want to apologize," Marcus continued, and Sarah blinked in surprise. "Apologize? For the way you were treated? For the laughter, the judgment, the complete lack of basic human decency shown by members of my staff?" His voice carried a weight that suggested this wasn't just corporate damage control. "I've spent the last 18 hours having some very difficult conversations with various employees about respect and professionalism." Sarah found her voice. "Mr. Thompson, I appreciate that, but I understand the position I put everyone in. Bringing Emma wasn't ideal." "Stop." The word was gentle but firm. "You brought your daughter because your childcare fell through, and you couldn't afford to miss the opportunity." "I know because I've been there." "You've been there?" Marcus leaned back in his chair, and for a moment, the CEO facade dropped, revealing something more vulnerable underneath. "My mother raised me and my sister alone after my father left when I was 7. She worked 3 jobs to keep us fed and housed, and sometimes when one of those jobs required her to be somewhere, and she couldn't find or afford childcare, we went with her." Sarah felt something loosen in her chest, a tension she'd been carrying for so long she'd forgotten it was there. "I remember sitting in the corner of a law office when I was about Emma's age, trying to be invisible, while my mother cleaned after hours. I remember the looks, the whispered comments, the way people made her feel small for doing whatever it took to survive." Marcus's eyes hardened slightly. "I swore then that if I ever had the power to change that dynamic, I would." "And you built all this?" Sarah gestured around the office. The view, the empire of success visible through the windows. "My mother built all this," Marcus corrected. "Her strength, her refusal to give up, her willingness to sacrifice everything for her children. That's the foundation of everything I've accomplished. I just had the privilege of standing on her shoulders." Sarah felt tears threaten and blinked them back. She'd become so accustomed to judgment, to having to justify her circumstances, that simple understanding felt overwhelming. "Tell me about Emma," Marcus said. "What about her?" "Yesterday, while you were being interviewed, I watched her." "Do you know what she was doing?" Sarah shook her head. "She was reading, not just coloring, reading. The receptionist had some magazines on the table, and your daughter was working her way through a Time article about renewable energy. She was sounding out words like photovoltaic and sustainability. When she came across a word she didn't know, she'd study the context and take her best guess." Pride swelled in Sarah's chest. Emma had always been bright, curious about everything, but hearing it recognized by someone else felt like validation of every bedtime story, every library visit, every patient explanation of how the world worked. "She's always been like that," Sarah said. "Ever since she could talk, she's been asking questions. Why is the sky blue? How do birds know where to fly? What makes plants grow? Sometimes I feel like I spend half my day looking things up on my phone so I can give her proper answers. What does she want to be when she grows up? Last week it was a marine biologist. This week she's decided she wants to design robots that can help clean up the ocean. Next week it'll probably be something completely different." Sarah smiled at the memory of Emma's earnest explanation of how underwater robots could collect plastic without harming the fish. Marcus laughed, a genuine sound that filled the office with warmth. "She sounds remarkable." And she gets that intellectual curiosity from somewhere. She gets it from having to figure out how to make the best of whatever situation we're in, Sarah said, then immediately worried she'd revealed too much. But Marcus nodded, as if he understood completely. Resilience is learned. Emma's learning it from watching you. They talked for another 20 minutes about Sarah's background, her experience, her goals, but it felt less like an interview and more like a conversation between two people who'd traveled similar roads. Marcus asked thoughtful questions about her administrative experience, her technical skills, her ability to work under pressure. The position Patricia was interviewing for yesterday, Marcus said eventually, was for an administrative assistant in our marketing department. Starting salary of $42,000, standard benefits, minimal room for advancement. Sarah's heart sank. Even that modest salary would have been life-changing for her and Emma. But I have a different proposition, Marcus continued. I need an executive assistant, someone who can manage complex schedules, coordinate with multiple departments, handle sensitive information, and essentially help me run the day-to-day operations of this company. It's demanding work. You'd be my right hand, my go-to person for everything from board meeting preparation to crisis management. Sarah's pulse quickened. What would something like that entail? Salary of $75,000 to start, full benefits including health, dental and vision, 4 weeks paid vacation, flexible scheduling to accommodate family needs, and opportunities for professional development and advancement. There's also a company scholarship program that could help with Emma's education down the line. Sarah stared at him, certain she'd misheard. I don't understand. Why me? Marcus leaned forward, his expression serious. Because yesterday, under pressure, facing humiliation and judgment, you maintained your dignity and protected your daughter's sense of security. Because you've survived impossible circumstances and kept fighting. Because you raised a 6-year-old who reads about renewable energy while other kids her age are watching cartoons. Because you have the exact combination of strength, intelligence and character that I need in someone I'm going to trust with the most important aspects of my professional life. Sarah felt the world tilt around her. Are you offering me the job? I'm offering you the opportunity. There would be a trial period, training, and you'd need to prove yourself like anyone else. But yes, if you want it, the position is yours. For the first time in months, Sarah allowed herself to truly believe that their luck might be changing, that all the struggle, all the sacrifice, all the nights spent wondering how they'd make it through another month might have been leading to this moment. If you're rooting for Sarah and Emma, tell me what country or city you're watching from. I'd love to know where their story is reaching. Sarah walked out of TechVision Solutions in a daze, clutching the folder of paperwork that would make her employment official. The Austin sun seemed brighter, the air cleaner, as if the entire world had shifted while she was in Marcus Thompson's office. She sat in her car for 10 minutes, staring at the employment contract, reading and rereading the salary figure until she was certain it wasn't a hallucination brought on by desperation. $75,000. More than she'd ever made in her life, more than she'd dared to dream possible when she'd walked into that first disastrous interview just 24 hours ago. Her phone buzzed with a text from Mrs. Chen. Emma is helping me make soup dumplings. How did it go? Sarah started to type her usual non-committal response, then stopped. For the first time in months, she had real news to share. I got it. I got the job. Her phone rang immediately. Sarah, oh honey, that's wonderful. Emma, come here, your mama got the job. Sarah could hear Emma's excited shriek in the background, followed by rapid footsteps. Mommy, Mrs. Chen says you got the job. Does this mean we can get the pancakes now? Sarah laughed, tears streaming down her face. Yes, baby. We can get the pancakes. We can get all the pancakes. The drive home felt like floating. Every familiar landmark, the food truck where she and Emma sometimes split a breakfast taco when money allowed, the library where they spent Saturday afternoons because it was free entertainment, the park where Emma played while Sarah searched for jobs on her phone, looked different now, touched with possibility instead of limitation. At Mrs. Chen's apartment, Emma launched herself into Sarah's arms with the force of a small missile. Mrs. Chen says you're going to work with computers and important people, Emma said, her eyes wide with excitement. Are you going to have your own office? I am going to have my own office, Sarah confirmed, still hardly believing it herself. Mrs. Chen beamed from her kitchen, flour dusting her apron. This calls for celebration. I'm making extra dumplings. Mrs. Chen, you don't have to. Nonsense. Emma helped me roll the dough. She's very good with her hands, this one. Very precise. The elderly woman's eyes twinkled. She told me she wants to design robots someday. With hands like hers and a mind like hers, she just might do it. They spent the evening at Mrs. Chen's small dining table, eating soup dumplings and talking about the future in ways that hadn't felt possible in months. Emma peppered Sarah with questions about her new job, her imagination running wild with possibilities. "Will you have a secretary?" Emma asked between bites. "I think I'm going to be someone's secretary," Sarah explained, "Mr. Thompson's assistant." "Is Mr. Thompson nice?" Sarah thought about Marcus's gentle demeanor, his understanding of their situation, the way he'd spoken about his own mother's struggles. "Yes, baby, I think Mr. Thompson is very nice. Will I get to meet him? Maybe someday." That night, after Emma was finally asleep, Sarah sat on her pull-out couch with her laptop, researching everything she could find about executive assistant responsibilities. The role was far more complex than she'd initially realized, part administrator, part project manager, part diplomatic liaison. She would be managing Marcus's calendar, coordinating with department heads, preparing reports, and essentially serving as the gatekeeper to one of Austin's most successful entrepreneurs. The responsibility was daunting, but for the first time in her adult life, Sarah felt like someone believed she was capable of rising to meet a challenge rather than merely surviving it. Her phone buzzed with a text from her sister Rebecca. "Mom told me you had another interview today. How did it go?" This time Sarah didn't hesitate. "I got the job. Executive assistant. Good salary, great benefits. We're going to be okay, Becca." Her phone rang within seconds. "Sarah, oh my God, that's amazing. I'm so proud of you." Rebecca's voice carried equal parts excitement and relief. "When do you start?" "Monday. They're giving me the weekend to get organized. Do you need help with anything? Professional clothes? Childcare arrangements? Anything?" Sarah felt a familiar tightness in her throat. Rebecca had been trying to help for months, offering money that Sarah was too proud to accept, suggesting that Sarah and Emma move to Houston, where the cost of living was lower. Sarah's stubborn independence had strained their relationship, but now, with stability finally within reach, she could hear the genuine love and concern in her sister's voice. "Actually," Sarah said slowly, "there might be something. Emma's going to need some new school clothes, and I want to get her a few things to celebrate. But I won't get my first paycheck for 2 weeks, and I spent the last of my savings on interview clothes. Done. I'll transfer some money tonight. And Sarah, I'm really, really happy for you. You've been fighting this battle alone for too long." After they hung up, Sarah walked to Emma's bedroom and stood in the doorway watching her daughter sleep. The room was small, barely large enough for a twin bed and a small dresser, but Emma had made it her own with drawings taped to the walls and books stacked on every available surface. Soon, Sarah thought, they could afford a bigger place, maybe a 2-bedroom apartment or even a small house with a yard where Emma could play. Maybe they could get the dog Emma had been asking for since she was 4. Maybe Sarah could stop lying awake at night, calculating whether they had enough money for groceries. The weekend passed in a blur of preparation. Rebecca's money arrived as promised, and Sarah took Emma shopping for the first time in months without having to count every dollar. They went to Target, and Sarah watched Emma's face light up as she realized she could pick out new school supplies, a backpack she actually liked instead of the clearance one Sarah had bought in August, and yes, even a few toys. "Can we really get all this?" Emma asked, clutching a set of colored pencils that came with their own carrying case. "We can really get all this." In the clothing section, Sarah found herself buying Emma outfits based on what looked nice rather than what was cheapest. A purple dress that Emma loved, jeans that actually fit properly, sneakers that weren't from the discount bin. The total came to more than Sarah had spent on clothing for both of them in the previous 6 months, but for once, she didn't feel guilty about it. That evening, they celebrated with dinner at Sunny Side Up. Emma ordered the pancakes with the smiley face, and Sarah got a burger that didn't come from the dollar menu. The waitress, recognizing them as infrequent customers, commented on how grown-up Emma looked in her new dress. "My mum got a really important job," Emma announced proudly. "She's going to work with a man who has his own building." "That's wonderful," the waitress said, smiling at Sarah. "Congratulations." Sunday evening, Sarah laid out her clothes for the first day. A navy blazer and matching skirt she'd splurged on, along with comfortable but professional-looking shoes. She'd researched Marcus's schedule, familiarized herself with the names of key employees, and prepared a notebook with questions and observations about the company. Emma helped her pack her new laptop bag, treating it like a sacred ritual. "This is your work bag," Emma said solemnly, placing each item carefully inside. "Your important papers go here, and your computer goes here, and your phone goes here." "What about luck?" Sarah asked. "Should we put some luck in there?" Emma considered this seriously, then ran to her room and returned with a small rubber elephant, a miniature version of her beloved stuffed animal. "Elephants are lucky," she explained, tucking it into the bag's front pocket. "And they never forget things, which is good for important jobs." That night, Sarah lay in bed listening to the familiar sounds of their apartment complex, Mrs. Chen's television through thin walls, the couple upstairs having their nightly argument, the distant hum of traffic from I-35. Soon, she thought, they might be listening to different sounds in a different place with different possibilities stretching out ahead of them. But even as excitement bubbled up inside her, a small voice of doubt whispered in the back of her mind. What if she wasn't qualified for this level of responsibility? What if Marcus Thompson had made a mistake? What if she embarrassed herself and lost this opportunity just as quickly as she'd gained it? Sarah pushed the thoughts away. She'd spent too many months doubting herself, second-guessing her worth, accepting other people's limitations as her own reality. Tomorrow, she would walk into Tech Vision Solutions as Marcus Thompson's executive assistant, and she would prove that his faith in her was justified. Emma appeared in the doorway, clutching her stuffed elephant. "Mommy, are you scared about tomorrow?" Sarah patted the couch and Emma climbed up beside her. "A little bit," Sarah admitted. "But sometimes being a little bit scared means you're about to do something important. Like when I had to read to the class? Exactly like that. And remember how proud you felt afterward?" Emma nodded, then snuggled closer. "I'm proud of you already, Mommy." As they sat together in the dim light filtering through their apartment windows, Sarah realized that whatever happened tomorrow, whatever challenges lay ahead, she'd already achieved something remarkable. She'd kept fighting when it would have been easier to give up. She'd maintained her dignity when others tried to strip it away. She'd raised a daughter who believed in possibility, even when their circumstances suggested otherwise. Tomorrow would be the first day of their new life. But tonight, in this moment, they were already exactly where they belonged. What comes next is even stronger. And to not miss how this story unfolds, tap the subscribe button now. It's free, and you'll be with me in every new story. Sarah's alarm went off at 6 a.m., but she'd been awake for 20 minutes already, running through mental checklists and trying to calm the butterflies that had taken up permanent residence in her stomach. This wasn't just any first day at work. This was the beginning of everything she'd fought for over the past 3 months. Emma was already up, sitting cross-legged on Sarah's pull-out couch in her pajamas, watching her mother get ready with the intensity of a scientist observing a crucial experiment. "You look really professional, Mommy," Emma said as Sarah adjusted her blazer for the 3rd time. "Thank you, baby. Do you remember what we talked about? Mrs. Chen is going to take you to school, and after school you'll go back to her apartment until I get home. And then we're going to celebrate with takeout from that Chinese place you like," Emma recited dutifully. "The one with the good fortune cookies." Sarah smiled, touched by her daughter's attention to detail. "That's right. And what are you going to tell your teacher when she asks how your weekend was?" "That my mom started her new job and we're really happy." Emma's face scrunched up in thought. "Can I tell her about the pancakes too?" "You can tell her about the pancakes too." The drive to Tech Vision Solutions felt different this time. Sarah wasn't arriving as a desperate job seeker, but as an employee, someone who belonged in that gleaming building, someone whose expertise was valued and needed. She'd left Emma with Mrs. Chen without any of the anxiety that had plagued her during previous childcare arrangements, knowing she could afford to pay for proper after-school care soon. James Rodriguez was waiting for her in the lobby, his warm smile immediately putting her at ease. "Ready for the grand tour?" he asked as they rode the elevator to the 15th floor. "As ready as I'll ever be. Marcus wanted me to show you around before he gets in. He's got a board meeting this morning, but he'll be back around 10 to go over your initial responsibilities." The executive floor bustled with quiet efficiency. James introduced Sarah to the other assistants, the department heads who regularly worked with Marcus, and the support staff who kept the company's upper levels running smoothly. Everyone was professional and welcoming, a stark contrast to the judgment she'd faced during that first interview. "This is your office," James said, opening a door to a space that made Sarah's breath catch. It wasn't huge, but it was hers. A real desk, not a folding table. A computer that didn't take 5 minutes to boot up. A window that looked out over Austin's downtown skyline. A nameplate that read, "Sarah Martinez, Executive Assistant to CEO." "The previous assistant left about a month ago for a position in Seattle," James explained. "Marcus has been managing his own schedule, which, as you can imagine, has been somewhat chaotic." Sarah sat behind her desk, running her hands over the smooth surface. 6 months ago, she'd been managing invoices and filing for a small marketing company. A year ago, she'd been planning a future with David that had evaporated like morning mist. Now she was sitting in an executive office, preparing to help run a multi-million-dollar company. The first few weeks will be about learning the systems and getting familiar with Marcus's preferences, James continued. He's incredibly easy to work with, direct, fair, and he actually listens when you have suggestions or concerns, but he's also busy, so you'll need to be proactive about anticipating his needs. They spent the next 2 hours going over software systems, filing procedures, and the intricate dance of executive-level scheduling. Sarah took detailed notes, her legal pad filling with information about board meeting protocols, travel arrangements, and the various personalities she'd need to navigate within the company. At exactly 10 a.m., Marcus Thompson appeared in her doorway, looking slightly harried but genuinely pleased to see her. "Sarah, welcome to the chaos," he said with a grin. "How's the orientation going? James has been incredibly helpful. I feel like I'm drinking from a fire hose, but it's starting to make sense." "Good. That's exactly how it should feel on day one." Marcus settled into the chair across from her desk, and Sarah was struck by how the gesture, a CEO sitting in his assistant's office rather than summoning her to his, spoke volumes about his management style. "I want to be transparent with you about what the next few weeks will look like," Marcus said. "We have a major product launch coming up in December, an educational software platform that we've been developing for 2 years. It's the biggest project in the company's history, and frankly, it's make or break for us." Sarah felt a flutter of anxiety. "What does that mean for my role?" "It means you're going to learn this job quickly, because I'm going to need you functioning at full capacity by the end of the month. Board meetings, client presentations, coordination between departments, travel arrangements for the launch tour, all of it will flow through you." The magnitude of the responsibility was daunting, but Sarah found herself nodding confidently. "I understand. I also want you to know that I believe in promoting from within." The assistant who left for Seattle. "She started in our mailroom 5 years ago. If you excel in this role, there will be opportunities for advancement. Operations manager, project director, maybe even department head eventually." Sarah's heart raced. Not just job security, but a career trajectory. A path forward that didn't involve constantly fighting for survival. The morning flew by as Sarah immersed herself in learning Marcus's routines. His calendar was a complex puzzle of meetings, calls, and strategic sessions that required careful coordination. She fielded calls from vendors, board members, and department heads, each interaction teaching her more about the company's ecosystem. At noon, Marcus knocked on her office doorframe. "How do you feel about working lunches?" he asked. "Whatever you need. I've got a lunch meeting with our head of product development and 2 potential investors. I'd like you to sit in, take notes, and start getting familiar with the launch project." The restaurant was one of those Austin establishments that managed to be both upscale and unpretentious. White tablecloths but live music, sophisticated food but reasonable prices. Sarah had never attended a business lunch before, and she was acutely aware of being the only woman at a table of 4 men discussing million-dollar investments. But as the conversation progressed, she found herself genuinely engaged. The software they were developing wasn't just another tech product. It was an adaptive learning platform designed to help students in underserved communities access quality education. The kind of program that could have made a difference for Emma or for Marcus himself growing up in foster care. "The pilot program in rural Texas schools has exceeded all our projections," the product development head was explaining. "Test scores improved by an average of 23% in schools using our platform." One of the investors leaned forward. "What about scalability? Can you handle rapid expansion if this takes off nationally?" Sarah found herself taking detailed notes, not just on what was being said, but on the dynamics of the conversation. How Marcus navigated disagreements, how he presented challenges as opportunities, how he balanced confidence with humility when discussing the company's prospects. After the investors left, Marcus and Sarah walked back to the office together. "What did you think?" he asked. "I think what you're building is remarkable," Sarah said honestly. "Not just the business, but the mission. Educational equity is something I care about deeply." "Because of Emma?" Sarah nodded. "She's incredibly bright, but if we'd stayed in our old situation, constant financial stress, subpar schools, no resources for enrichment, her potential might have been wasted. Programs like yours could level the playing field for kids like her." Marcus stopped walking, his expression thoughtful. "You know, I've been so focused on the technical aspects of this launch that I haven't thought enough about the human stories. Would you be interested in helping develop that angle for our presentations? I'd love to. The rest of the afternoon passed in a blur of meetings, phone calls, and system training. Sarah found herself settling into the rhythm of executive support, anticipating Marcus's needs, streamlining his processes, and gradually becoming an integral part of his professional machinery. At 5:30, Marcus appeared in her doorway again. "Go home," he said. "It's your first day and you have a daughter waiting for you." Sarah looked at her desk, still covered with tasks she wanted to complete. "I can stay a little longer." "Sarah," Marcus's voice was gentle but firm, "one of the reasons I hired you is because you're a devoted mother. Don't lose that in pursuit of being the perfect employee. Emma needs you present and engaged, not exhausted and overwhelmed." The drive home felt like emerging from a fascinating alternate universe. Sarah's head buzzed with new information, new responsibilities, new possibilities. She'd spent 8 hours solving problems, making decisions, and contributing to something larger than her own survival. At Mrs. Chen's apartment, Emma launched into an excited recounting of her school day, then peppered Sarah with questions about her first day at work. "Did you sit in the big office?" Emma asked as they walked hand in hand to their apartment. "I have my own office," Sarah said, still marveling at the words. "With a window. With a window that looks out over the whole city." Emma's eyes went wide. "Can I see it someday? Maybe we can arrange a visit," Sarah said, imagining Emma's reaction to the executive floor's impressive views. That evening, over Chinese takeout and fortune cookies, Sarah realized something fundamental had shifted. For the first time since David left, she wasn't just surviving. She was building. Building a career, building security for Emma, building a future that extended beyond next month's rent payment. Emma's fortune cookie contained a slip of paper that read, "Your family will be happy and prosperous." "Look, Mummy," Emma held up the fortune. "It's about us." Sarah's fortune was equally appropriate. Great things come to those who don't give up. As they cleaned up dinner, Sarah caught sight of their reflection in the apartment's small mirror, a mother and daughter who had weathered the storm and emerged stronger, ready for whatever came next. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new learning curves, new opportunities to prove herself. But tonight they were exactly where they were supposed to be. 3 weeks into her new position, Sarah had found her rhythm at Tech Vision Solutions. Her days began at 7 a.m. with reviewing Marcus's schedule, prioritizing emails, and preparing briefing documents for his morning meetings. She'd mastered the complex dance of executive scheduling, learned to read the subtle dynamics between department heads, and become Marcus's trusted filter for the constant stream of decisions that required his attention. But nothing had prepared her for the morning Marcus walked into her office with an expression she'd never seen before, a mixture of excitement and nervous energy that immediately put her on high alert. "Sarah, I need you to clear my calendar for next Tuesday," he said, settling into the chair across from her desk that had become his unofficial second office. "The entire day?" Sarah pulled up his schedule, mentally calculating the dozen meetings and calls that would need to be rescheduled. "The entire day? We're going to Austin Elementary." Sarah looked up from her computer screen, confused. "Austin Elementary?" Marcus leaned forward, his eyes bright with the kind of enthusiasm she'd learned to associate with his best ideas. "Remember what you said about human stories? About the kids who could benefit from our educational platform?" "Of course. I've been thinking about that conversation for weeks. We've got investors lined up. The technology is solid, but what we're missing is the emotional connection. The board meeting next month isn't just about presenting data. It's about making people understand why this matters." Sarah nodded, following his logic. "And Austin Elementary?" "It's in East Austin, serving primarily low-income families. They've been pilot testing our software for 6 months and the results are extraordinary. But more importantly, the principal, Maria Santos, has agreed to let us visit, meet the students and document their stories." The pieces clicked into place in Sarah's mind. "You want to feature real students in the board presentation? I want to show investors what educational equity actually looks like. Not just statistics on a PowerPoint slide, but actual kids whose lives are being changed." Marcus paused, studying Sarah's face. "And I want you to come with me. Your perspective on this as a parent, as someone who understands what's at stake for these families, is exactly what this project needs." Sarah felt a familiar flutter of nerves mixed with excitement. "You want me to help with the presentation?" "I want you to help develop the entire narrative strategy. This isn't just admin work anymore, Sarah. This is strategic planning at the highest level. That afternoon, Sarah found herself researching Austin Elementary with the same intensity she'd once brought to job hunting. The school served 400 students, 85% of whom qualified for free or reduced lunch. Test scores had historically lagged behind the district average, but since implementing TechVision's adaptive learning platform, reading and math proficiency had jumped dramatically. The statistics were impressive, but Sarah found herself thinking about the individual stories behind the numbers. Kids like Emma, bright and curious, but potentially limited by circumstances beyond their control. Kids whose parents worked multiple jobs and couldn't afford tutoring or enrichment programs. Kids whose potential might be overlooked in overcrowded classrooms with outdated resources. She was still deep in research when her phone buzzed with a text from Mrs. Chen. "Emma has a surprise for you when you get home." Sarah smiled, grateful as always for the elderly woman's presence in their lives. Mrs. Chen had become more than a babysitter. She was the grandmother Emma had never known, the support system that allowed Sarah to fully commit to her demanding new role. The drive home took her through the same East Austin neighborhood she'd been reading about all afternoon. She passed Austin Elementary itself, a modest brick building surrounded by a chain-link fence, and found herself wondering about the children inside. Tomorrow, she realized, she'd be meeting some of them, hearing their stories, understanding how TechVision's technology was changing their educational experience. At home, Emma was practically vibrating with excitement. "Mommy! Mommy! Look what I made!" Emma held up a drawing that made Sarah's breath catch. It was a picture of TechVision Solutions building, rendered with the careful attention to detail that Emma brought to everything she cared about. But it wasn't just the accuracy that struck Sarah, it was the story the picture told. Emma had drawn herself and Sarah walking into the building together, both of them smiling, both of them belonging in that space of glass and success. "Mrs. Chen helped me look up a picture of your building on her computer," Emma explained proudly. "And I drew us going to work together, like someday when I'm older and I can be your helper." Sarah knelt down to Emma's eye level, overwhelmed by her daughter's faith in their future. "It's beautiful, baby, absolutely beautiful. Do you think Mr. Thompson would like to see it?" Sarah studied the drawing again, Emma's careful rendering of the building where her mother now worked, the hopeful vision of a future where they walked through those doors together. "I think Mr. Thompson would love to see it." That evening, after Emma was asleep, Sarah sat at their small dining table preparing for the next day's school visit. She'd drafted questions for Principal Santos, researched best practices for interviewing children, and outlined a framework for capturing the human stories behind TechVision's educational mission. But her eyes kept drifting to Emma's drawing, propped against the salt and pepper shakers like a piece of fine art. 6 months ago, they'd been facing eviction, eating peanut butter sandwiches for dinner, and wondering how they'd survive another month. Now Emma was drawing pictures of their shared future, confidently imagining a world where she belonged in the same professional spaces as her mother. The transformation wasn't just in their circumstances, it was in their sense of possibility. Tuesday morning arrived grey and drizzly, typical Austin weather that couldn't dampen Sarah's anticipation. She'd dressed professionally but approachably, mindful that she'd be interacting with children who might be intimidated by corporate formality. Marcus picked her up at 8 a.m., and during the drive to Austin Elementary, they discussed strategy for the day. "The key is letting the kids tell their own stories," Marcus said as they pulled into the school's parking lot. "We're not here to put words in their mouths or create artificial narratives. We just want to understand how the technology is actually affecting their learning experience." Principal Maria Santos met them in the school's main office, a warm, energetic woman in her 50s, who radiated the kind of passionate dedication that Sarah associated with the best educators. "Mr. Thompson, Ms. Martinez, welcome to Austin Elementary. Our students are so excited to show you what they've been working on." The first classroom they visited was a third-grade class using TechVision's reading comprehension program. Sarah watched, fascinated, as children worked at individual tablets, the software adapting in real time to their skill levels and learning styles. "Before this program, I struggled with some of these kids," the teacher, Ms. Rodriguez, explained quietly. 30 students, different reading levels, different learning needs. It was impossible to give everyone the individual attention they deserved. Now the software does the initial assessment and adaptation, freeing me up to work one-on-one with students who need extra support. Sarah found herself drawn to a girl about Emma's age, working intently on a reading exercise about ocean conservation. The child's focus was absolute. her fingers moving confidently across the tablet screen as she navigated through increasingly complex text. "What are you learning about today?" Sarah asked, kneeling beside the girl's desk. "Marine biology," the girl, Sophia, replied without looking up from her screen. "Did you know that sea turtles can live for over 100 years? But plastic pollution is making them sick because they think plastic bags are jellyfish and they try to eat them." Sarah's heart clenched with recognition. This could be Emma, curious and engaged, her mind hungry for knowledge that the world might or might not provide. "That's fascinating. What else have you learned?" "The program taught me about different types of ocean animals, and now I'm reading about how scientists are trying to protect them. When I grow up, I want to be a marine biologist like the people in these stories." Sarah exchanged glances with Marcus, both of them recognizing the magic happening in this classroom. Technology wasn't replacing human connection, it was enabling it, freeing teachers to nurture individual dreams and curiosities. They spent the morning moving through different classrooms, witnessing similar scenes of engaged learning. A fifth-grade math class where students worked through complex problem-solving at their own pace. A second-grade science lesson where the software adapted to different learning styles, offering visual, auditory, and kinesthetic approaches to the same concepts. But it was during lunch that Sarah encountered the story that would anchor their presentation. A fourth grader named Marcus, the same name as her boss, which made them both smile, approached their table in the cafeteria with the confidence of a natural storyteller. "Are you the people who made the learning program?" young Marcus asked. "We are," Marcus Thompson replied. "What do you think of it?" "It's awesome. Before, I thought I was bad at reading because I was slower than everyone else. But the program showed me that I learned differently, not wrong. Now I read 2 grade levels above where I started, and my mom says I might be able to get into the advanced program at the middle school next year." Sarah felt tears prick her eyes as she listened to this 10-year-old articulate something profound about learning differences and self-worth. "What's your favorite thing about the program?" "It doesn't make me feel stupid when I don't understand something right away. It just gives me a different way to learn it. And when I do understand, it celebrates with me." Young Marcus grinned. "Plus, the stories are really cool. I'm reading about kids who built rockets in their backyard." That afternoon, driving back to Tech Vision Solutions, Sarah and Marcus rode in contemplative silence for several minutes. "Those kids," Sarah finally said, "they're not just using educational software. They're discovering who they are as learners, as thinkers, as people with unlimited potential." Marcus nodded. "And 6 months ago, some of them were falling through the cracks, being labeled as slow or difficult or unmotivated. We need to tell their stories," Sarah said, her mind already working through presentation strategies. "Not just the data about improved test scores, but the human transformation, the confidence, the curiosity, the dreams that are now possible. Can you put together a comprehensive presentation proposal by Friday?" Marcus asked. Sarah thought about young Marcus and his newfound reading confidence, about Sophia and her marine biology dreams, about all the students whose potential was being unlocked by thoughtful technology implementation. Yes, absolutely, yes. That evening, Emma helped Sarah organize her notes from the school visit, carefully arranging papers while Sarah typed up her observations. "Were the kids nice?" Emma asked. "They were wonderful, smart and curious, just like you." Emma considered this. "Maybe someday I could go to work with you and meet them." Sarah looked at her daughter, this brilliant, hopeful little girl whose own educational journey was now secure, thanks to the opportunities that had opened up for their family. "Maybe someday you could," Sarah agreed. "But for now, you have your own learning to do." As she tucked Emma into bed that night, Sarah realized that their story was still being written. The desperate single mother who'd walked into that first humiliating job interview 3 weeks ago had become a strategic thinker, a valued team member, a professional whose insights were shaping the future of educational technology. But more than that, she'd become someone who understood that individual stories of transformation, hers, Emma's, young Marcus's, Sophia's, were the most powerful force for creating lasting change. The presentation she would develop over the next 3 days wouldn't just secure funding for Tech Vision's educational platform. It would ensure that thousands of children like the ones she'd met at Austin Elementary would have access to the kind of personalized, engaging education that could unlock their full potential. As Sarah drifted off to sleep that night, she thought about how far they'd come and how far they could still go. The future, for the first time in years, felt limitless. If you want to keep hearing stories like this, stories of hope, transformation, and second chances, tap the red button that says subscribe. It's free, and it helps me keep sharing tales of real people overcoming impossible odds to build better lives.